Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is August 3rd, 2018. Greetings from Ocean Park, Maine, where hot weather has finally made it to our old cottage here, making it feel more like Dallas than it usually does. There's no air conditioning, so we depend on sea breezes to cool things down, and last night there was barely a breath to do that job. Not that I'm complaining. After our 5 days in Omaha for my niece Sarah's wedding to Nick and a couple of days in Cambridge, it's very good to be back at the beach, probably well into September. In a non-Amazon gadget note, I want to mention that I have been trying a promising technology from Bose called wireless noise masking sleep buds. They are comfortable in the ear. They kind of like AirPods. There's no wires, and you pair them with your smartphone in order to bring calm sounds to your brain throughout the night. It's like the white noise my grandsons listen to, but the buds also cancel out other noise that can be distracting, like a snoring Yorkie in bed. I'm not kidding. I slept pretty well in Cambridge for the first 2 nights I tried them. I was listening to a setting named Swell that sounds like the surf, and since I can hear real surf out the windows of our bedroom here, it seemed kind of silly to use that setting, so I switched to Rustle, which sounds like wind in a forest. Very nice. These sleep buds are kind of pricey. I paid $249 for mine on Amazon, but if they help me reach the holy grail of 7 hours of sleep a night instead of my usual 5 or 6, they will be worth every penny. My guest this week probably will be getting more sleep this month since he will be retiring from his associate professorship at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I visited with Jim Jones while I was in Omaha and enjoyed hearing what he's learned about reading technology in a quarter century in higher education.
The use of electronic technology might be more useful outside of the classroom in terms of being able to search and sort.
Also this week, we'll take a look at the news, a new X-ray feature for Kindle on iPhones and iPads, and some more of your comments on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the show. Time for the news. By the way, I heard from enough of you to make me think that the news is a good thing to touch base with, that it's, as one of you put it, it's good to know that Amazon is still looking strong, and that if there's some kind of a big news story which means that this whole Amazon thing is maybe heading south, that this will be a good place to hear about it. So that's not a story we're likely to be hearing anytime soon. This week there was a bubble of action about the idea that there might be another Fire phone, that Amazon was working on a phone, and then that got walked back. So I don't really expect that the Fire phone is going to be reprised. The Alexa platform seems pretty strong to me without having a phone, and Amazon is making partnerships with other phones that have all of the Amazon stuff embedded. So that was an intriguing story, but not one that I think is likely to have much to come of it. Story in Bloomberg was speculating on how wealthy Jeff Bezos' parents have become by investing in Amazon stock early on, right the first year. And we've always known that that was something that happened, and that certainly did have a good outcome. It's a little difficult to tell exactly how many billions his parents are worth because of this, because there's no way to tell if they've sold the stock or what they've done with that initial stake in Amazon, which certainly did turn out well for them. They quietly run a family foundation, and that might be an interesting thing to see if we get someone on the show to talk about how they handle that. Amazon dominates online retailing. That's a story from Bloomberg, and 50% of online sales in the U.S. is accounted for by Amazon. This one was interesting because it credited the Amazon associates' way of spreading the Amazon presence throughout the web for part of Amazon's dominance of online retail. Of course, that's something that I use. In fact, it's the only source of income that I have from the podcast to help cover expenses, is that I do have an Amazon Associates account, and at thekindlechronicles.com, if you click on the fairly prominent shop here button, and then when you buy things, the commissions benefit the show, and lots of people do this, and it's worth putting on a website. I've certainly found it to be the case, and when you think of the thousands, perhaps millions of websites that have these Amazon links, it stands to reason that that would be a pretty smart strategy for dominating online retail the way Amazon has. The Voyage is apparently no more. This is a story in Good e-reader. I heard about it from Mark Grant, and that's, you could see there'd be some shuffling maybe of a new e-ink reader coming along. I'm not sure where it would fall, maybe at the low end of the pricing, or I can't believe there'd be something even more pricey than the Oasis, which I like a lot, but there is one less item in the standard lineup now. The Voyage is apparently not, you won't find it on the website, and there have been indications in the past that that was being phased out. For the tech tip, I noticed that there was an update to the Amazon Kindle app for iOS that improves X-ray. It also does one other thing that's a little odd. If you're reading the Kindle app on your iPhone or your iPad, there's now a way to make the paper not sepia, not white, not black for night, but green. And I tried this on my iPhone. I guess it's pleasant. I don't think I'm going to be choosing to read green pages. Maybe on St. Patrick's Day that would be fun. The other one that is notable is that they call it in the notes to the version, this is version 6.8.1 for the iOS Kindle app, a redesigned X-ray makes exploring the contents of your book easier. Well, I compared X-ray on a Kindle book on my iPhone with X-ray on my Kindle Oasis and also with my Kindle Fire HD 8. And these aren't dramatic differences. The main thing that's obvious is that along the top, if you open an X-ray page and you're reading a book that has X-ray, these are sort of the bones of the book, and they help you keep track of characters. They're really a handy capability that Amazon has added to Kindle reading. Under the new iOS version, the only three tags up top are all items, people, or terms. And if you click on one of those three, you'll see things on the current page you're reading and then also a whole list in the book. Now, if you look at the same Kindle page on an Oasis, there are more choices along the top, and it's not obvious to me which is the better way to set it up. Along the top of the Kindle, and the same thing is true for the Fire, under X-ray you'll see notable clips, people, terms, and images, and again separating from this page and the whole book. I suppose it's clearer to have just the three categories, all items, people, and terms. It seems a little cleaner, and the notable clips is, I think, sort of a confusing category of information that I haven't really used myself. I suspect that this version of X-ray will populate across the other devices, and it makes me wish that Amazon would not have different versions of a tool like X-ray on the different devices. It seems to me that's not very user-friendly. If I use something like X-ray and I switch from my iPhone to my Kindle or my Fire, it just seems like there's friction there to say, oh yeah, on this one I have some other choices compared with the other device. They're all Amazon devices. They're all Kindle reading. Why can't they all operate the same on a powerful tool like X-ray? My guest this week is Jim Jones, an associate professor of management at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Since Darlene and I spent a fair amount of time in Omaha visiting her sister Deb and her brother Rod and family, I've had a chance to visit with Jim for coffee and Kindle Talk numerous times in the past decade. We usually meet at a coffee shop named Scooters. But for this recorded conversation, he drove to meet me at Deb's home in the Ponca Hills area of northern Omaha. We'll pick up the conversation where I asked Jim what has changed in the students that he's seen in his classrooms in the past 25 years.
Well, one thing, I think I can, if I put it this way, it's kind of a reciprocal issue. When I started, obviously I had no experience. In fact, I made a joke my very first class. I thought it was a joke. I said, I want you to I taught an evening class for my first afternoon class. And in the afternoon class, I said, I want you to know that this is not the first time I've ever taught this class. I said, now, the bad news is last night was. So got a couple of chuckles, but I actually, what I found out was that it's probably not the best thing to tell that the room that, you're a rookie in this, because sometimes what I found over the years is that, and we might talk about this in a bit, but the expectations of students, maybe every generation says this, but I found in my later years, it's really felt almost more adversarial, that as opposed to where I was saying I like helping people reach a path and goal. Now very often I think we're seen as an obstacle in the way of getting that grade, which will help with the promotion and so forth. So I think from my early years, the lack of experience was a problem with engagement. And in my later years, I think the classroom has the desire of the students, what their goals are, don't always mesh with what my goal is. So what I've tried to do over all those years is a series of things, some of which I lifted from my time at Gallup, such as asking students what name they like to be called. I mean, there was a lot of research that Gallup was conducting at the time and still does that shows that just by calling a person Len, is your full name Leonard?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you prefer Len and I call you Leonard, or if you call me James or Jim or whatever it is, that there is actually business outcomes that are associated with not calling people by their preferred names. And if you do, that at that time anyway, there was something like a 15% return just based upon a simple thing like that. So
15% more likely to buy your product or whatever you're...
the figure I'm citing, I think, was about profitability.
Oh.
But if the listeners who are familiar with the StrengthsFinder program right now, there's a lot of research that Gallup has done that has shown that employee engagement particularly has many positive outcomes in terms of safety, turnover, return on investment, et cetera.
And you can really make some progress on that just by something as simple as calling people what they want to be called.
Calling what they want to be called. I always went through an exercise called Hot Buttons, and so learning what are the things that people enjoy talking about, being involved in. I ask what are their goals for the course. And it's not just an icebreaker, as I used it, but I would use it in lesson plans. So if there was a particular topic and I had a random participation sheet and I could see that somebody was going to be called on, I would go to their focus on you sheet and see what their hot buttons were and where they worked and try to use it. And in my evaluations, I often got that comment that, he seems to try to make things applicable to us. Got other comments that weren't always quite so positive, but that was one of the things that did give me a sense of satisfaction that, again, when I started teaching, there was no manual or anything. You're pretty much thrown into the deep end of the pool. And so you develop, some practices and philosophy and so forth. And so over that time, I've been gratified that many of the things that I've tried to do seem to come out for many students, not universally, but for many students in the way that I intended.
Do you have any sense of why students might be more adversarial to teachers and sort of focusing on the grade, and if you don't give them a good grade, you're just a problem? It's not. Are they under more pressure to perform and get jobs than they were 25 years ago, or why would there be that shift, do you think?
And I want to say, just as a caveat, that I'm not just saying this in my 2018 version of Get Off My Lawn. I mean, in talking with many people in my profession and retirees and young professors, I think it is a greater reality of the classroom. And a lot of it, I think, does seem to stem from pressures to get into college. I think a lot of kids are pressured to go to college when that may not be the best environment for them to maximize, their own abilities and interests. But whether it's from family or society, there's this thought that you have to go to a college, you have to go to a good one, whatever good means. Yeah. You're competing against however many people. And so I think that we've built in this expectation that I get the sense in many of my courses, and there's been opinion pieces and some research, I think, done on the fact that many students expect to get an A in everything, and our talents aren't distributed that way. I mean, we don't all have great talent in everything, so it doesn't make sense to expect to be at the top in everything. But nevertheless, I think that is what we've gotten to. And I will say again, this may be heretical in my soon-to-be former profession, but that phrase in loco parentis, I mean, we're supposed to be the adults there, but I think often institutions, for, again, pressures of tuition dollars and so forth, enable that sense, sometimes by rewarding people for achievement that they haven't actually earned. So.
Grade inflation.
I'll get off the soapbox for a second.
Yeah, well, you've earned the right to stand there, having seen enough of it. Well, one thing that you and I have talked about over the years has been print textbooks versus screens, that sort of fundamental difference in the classroom. And now I suppose we'd be talking the last 10 years since the introduction of the Kindle and the iPad and all. Have you come to any personal beliefs based on your experience as to, I mean, if you had to choose and UNO said you can only use print or only use screens, how would you compare the two just as teaching tools?
A lot of this is going to be based on personal experience, even as a student, and values. And so, with that caveat, and you mentioned tablets, but even the dual-use devices like the Microsoft Surface is something we're both kind of gadget junkies, so if I'm walking around the classroom and I spot something I'm not quite familiar with, I'll say, oh, is this the... And so there are more devices that are used in the classroom. If I had to make a rough estimate, it might be over half now that are using, and then it may even be much more than half who are using some sort of laptop or tablet, etc. My personal belief, and I shared some research with you that adds some weight to that, is that the technology for gathering information and for compiling information is much greater. And so in that sense, the tablets, the laptops, etc., I think may have more benefit than paper in terms of, the cell phone or the smartphone. And so took me a while to get used to many students in the middle of class, pulling out their phone and
they take a picture of what's on the
slides and so forth. Which is one reason I don't post the slides before class. But I guess what I'm getting to is that with the tremendous explosion in the ability to gather that information, I think there's been a concurrent loss of connection with the information. So I think I'd sent you an article about taking notes. And you, on a recent episode, I think you were touching on that same idea. So this is not just an opinion, but there's some evidence that shows that when you take notes by hand, and you have to, that even it's subconsciously, your brain engages with that differently and actually can change the wiring in our brains are much more amenable to change than I think was thought even maybe 30 years ago. So I believe that the level of learning on the Bloom's hierarchy that talks about comprehension has been weakened by the ability to just, especially people who are doing laptops, they're furiously trying to get every word down in the lecture. I almost said sermon, Freudian slip, or to get every word on the slide, and they're missing, the processing of what are the salient points. And when you're writing notes, I think you're forced to, especially with poor handwriting like mine, you're forced to make sure that you get the most powerful things.
Yeah, because as you can only write at a certain speed, generally slower. So somewhere between what you're hearing, what you're processing through your mind and your hand, you're making kind of summaries already just by what you put down on the paper.
And again, as a student, I only have my own experience, which was in the previous century. So, when you learn, I think, how to take down the most critical points, and you do have the backup then of the textbook or the computer or so many online resources now. But I think that, again, every generation, is what it is, and this generation is coming up through even grade school and middle school with electronic technology. So I don't think it's going away, but I think, again, that's part of the challenge of we as the professors and the faculty to find a way to still get the learning across. I know I'm not the only person that's ever made this analogy, but a common analogy in the classroom is a training model versus an education model. And again, it's in our graduate programs. Over my time teaching there, that's one of the things that's sometimes a disconnect between me and some students is I use somewhat of a Socratic method, and I don't focus as much on the how-tos or the tools. It's particularly in the HR community, the business community. I've been a part of several surveys of our business community as to what they're looking for in graduates. And almost universally, they say we can teach them our technology, we can teach them the tools, but we want people who are able to critically reason and who are able to work together collaboratively. And it goes along with that checking off the box, I need to get this grade. I think there's much more of a desire by students for a training method. When I say students, hopefully it's clear that I'm not saying every student.
Oh, yeah, just sort of trends.
Or even 95. But there's a certain type of student who, a certain type of teaching appeals to. This isn't every endeavor in life. It'll be interesting if I'm still around in 25 years, to see what changes have happened then.
Yes, it could swing back, I suppose. It seems like it's trending toward one direction.
The idea of the physical classroom right now is just like physical newspapers is, it's in a little bit, to say danger now might sound alarming, but who would have thought 10 years ago that so many physical newspapers in the top 25 circulation would be gone? Who would have thought that online education, which many universities, including mine, are pushing, again, because it's more tuition dollars and, there's not as much physical space needed, et cetera. And, so we have the advent of the massive online organizational courses, or the MOOCs. So part of that fascinates me, as someone who was alive and sentient in July of '69 when man landed on the moon. That, to me, that's still a big thing. I don't know what kids think about it today. So to see these changes in one way is really kind of amazing as a student of history. And so that's why, again, I say these things that I'm saying aren't meant to be saying that one is bad and one is good. I have my own beliefs about what might be effective and, again, how I prefer to teach. And which is one of the reasons I'm stepping away, is I'd like to scratch my own back a little bit more and maybe point my own efforts into an area that might give more regular satisfaction and intrinsic reward.
One thing I noticed, I haven't followed it in too much detail over the past 10 years, but the promise of digital textbooks. It always seemed like, gee, that ought to be something that's useful. And Amazon came out, the Kindle DX, the large e-ink Kindle. I think they really made a push trying to get that adopted in universities, and it seemed like it didn't meet their expectations. The Kindle DX is no longer. Do you have any sense of what they did wrong with the DX, or what a really successful digital textbook might look like compared with the ones that have been tried so far?
As I recall some of the commentary when the DX came out, and I don't know if it was Nielsen, it might have been Nielsen and probably several others that did research studies on the usability factor of the DX. But one of the things that I think I recall reading, and that if I didn't actually read it, I would surmise, is that in classroom use of things for note-taking or reading or referring to something, I think it's a lot more difficult than most people might imagine to, if you say turn to page 47 on a paper book, people are probably going to get there within 2 seconds of each other, or 5 seconds. If you say refer to page 47 and one person has a DX and one person has an iPad, and so the ability to get to that information is going to be somewhat difficult. If you have to use a reference to a word to enter in a search field and you don't know how to spell it correctly. In terms of the DX, I think part of it was just the usability in the classroom for rapid response.
Getting everybody on the same page, so to speak.
I'm pretty sure that those didn't have any sort of stylus input, so
That's right.
If you were taking notes, you would still have to have some form of...
Yeah, it had that funky little chiclet keyboard at the bottom of it, which was not a fast way to type.
No.
Yeah.
To put it in a broad capsule, I think the DX had some usability issues.
Yeah.
I know that we've talked in the past about devices like the Entourage Edge, which was a two-screen device,
one
e-reader and one
LCD.
LCD tablet. There was a program, I don't know if you ever looked into it. The product never came out, but it was the gadget world was gadget junkie world was abuzz about the Microsoft Courier, which had...
What was that?
It was a device that also it was a two-screen device.
Oh.
I think it was initially going to be targeted toward creative individuals, because a lot of the concept ads they did showed artists being able to, things that now actually you can do in terms of moving stuff from one screen to another.
Yeah.
So, in terms of devices that might help in the classroom now, I think that general idea of a multi-purpose electronic tool would be useful, and with the Edge and iPads now and Kindle Fires, I think they all have cameras, so to the extent that you want to capture cameras, and with the tablet side of the dual screen devices, you could go to a link. So there's a lot of usefulness, I think, in that concept, but I still go back to the idea that the most powerful machine in the classroom or out is, inside our skulls.
Right.
I still am a student in some cases and going to workshops or conferences or preparing for class, is that the use of the electronic technology might be more useful outside of the classroom in terms of being able to search and sort. But in the classroom, again, I think I really do strongly feel that attention is so critical to actually understanding that the more that you can remove the electronic connection and the focus on inputting electronically, or even worse sometimes, I think, is passively taking pictures of the screen. And I'm in the minority amongst many of my brethren and sisterin in the academy, in that I don't post lecture slides before class, for the reason that I found out that for some students that became a reason to definitely check out either mentally or physically.
Yeah, right.
And then when the exam time came and they found out that's not sufficient, well, I get no glee out of somebody failing. So, sometimes you're a parent and a grandparent, sometimes you have to be the bad guy in order to help somebody out in the long run.
They would have to listen to you and maybe think about the stuff. And think about what you're saying. And then at the end, if they could have the slides as a way to capture.
Right. Oh, yeah. I always post them afterwards.
Yeah.
And,
it's just the timing of it.
And I always really tried to stress, that's one thing that students probably got sick of me saying, is, do you have any questions? I really wanted to make students feel safe. And many students don't. There's, again, it really disabused my naive notions. I really wanted to go into education. I was really, thrilled to have that opportunity. Couldn't believe that, somebody was going to ask me, to be the teacher. But I found out that just, as in any human endeavor, there are some people who are mean in the classroom or abusive, not physically, but, and will put students down or make them not feel safe to come out of their comfort zone to ask questions, and that's how you learn. So I think, again, a lot of what I think is important in learning, whether it's in a classroom, in a corporation, or a one-on-one coaching session, is that human element. And the devices, I think, are tools.
Yeah. And they have to be designed with the primacy of the human element. What's this new tablet out? The Remarkable tablet.
I saw that.
That seems like it's going in a fruitful direction. I had a listener describe how good it felt when you wrote with the stylus. It was immediate action. There was no lag. Some other aspects of the tablet didn't seem quite ready yet, but the simplifying of the note-taking process to something like that, it seems to fit with what you're talking about, the desire to have some focus in the classroom on thinking things through and not just capturing them with a keyboard and everything.
I'd like to be able to try that sometime because I'm having a hard time imagining. I mean, I understand intellectually what people are describing, but it's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that feel because people talk about it, very passionately. When something comes along, that I know the lag is one of the things that people talk about with stylists or stylists.
Yeah, I think I remember that from some of the other devices there, and it was sort of a problem. Another thing I think we've talked about in the past, the idea that somebody at some point is going to do research that says we're going to show this, maybe a nonfiction book passage to a student, and they're going to read it on paper, they're going to have the same amount of time, and then somebody else or the same person, there's going to be sort of a well-designed research thing which tries to measure whether the information coming in off of an e-ink screen, I mean, that's the one I'd like to see as opposed to the tablet. Because the e-ink screen tends to have fewer words on it, that's really the biggest difference. But I haven't seen any research that's been done in the past decade on that topic. Have you?
Yeah, there's and I can forward you some sites. There's been a number of studies that deal with the methodology of information, and I know you had one guest. I think she may have worked with Nielsen, with the Jacob Nielsen, Hua Long, I think may have been. But so, and I remember that episode because she was talking about some of the issues that I think are important to study, like not just speed. I mean, I know there's been studies about which can be read more quickly, but also things like comprehension, recall, and I think. So when you were mentioning about classroom efficacy, those are all important. So certainly electronic devices have some advantages, if you will, in terms of speed, in terms of durability, etc. I know you've been interested in a long time in things like dyslexia and things that might be affected by more words on the page or even some of those devices. I think you talked with people about only having a single word or maybe on a watch screen. But I think that in terms of recall and also in terms of exciting that passion that I talked about earlier, one of my big regrets right now is that I have a study that's like most studies have in recent years have become ongoing that we're actually looking at using an eye tracker to study physiological changes based upon somebody reading a passage, whether it's nonfiction, fiction, newspaper, whatever, on paper versus on an electronic screen. In the first iteration of the study, my part of it was just asking some basic questions about student preferences in terms of using electronic technology. Specifically, I said tablets, laptops, or versus reading on paper. In my informal questioning of my classes periodically, I think it's a common conception now that these kids today, all they want is their gadgets. Many of the students I talk to say no, they actually do still prefer to read books. In this non-biological part of this study, I asked them whether they had a preference for reading on paper for study versus pleasure, etc. And actually that data just now compiled, so I haven't done a lot of analysis on that. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is that I know that many school systems, both K through 12 and some university systems, are making very significant budget decisions based upon a presumption about what students' preferences are. And not many of them have actually tested those presumptions. We're in a budget crisis in Nebraska right now in the state, period. And so since we're part of the state university system, that affects us. And so to me, it's almost criminal that, especially, I work in a business college, and so we make decisions sometimes that aren't predicated on the same things that we're teaching students about.
Sure, if this was a business, you'd want to know that information.
Yes, so I think that there's some of those studies are being done, and I don't think they've reached enough of a critical mass in terms of results or in interest from journal publishers. Because, again, that's part of the academic life, publish or perish. And so sometimes you're forced to research things that are going to have a quicker payoff. But I think that it's undoubted that that will become a greater.
It sounds like some of the initial impression you've had on the preference side is that students surprisingly aren't preferring the gadgets. They're
not by any massive, not by any 90 to 10 percentage.
I get the feeling it's sort of maybe 50-50. Is it?
I'd feel comfortable saying there's much more of a rough split that way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just a surmise. Somebody probably has actually studied this, but my surmise would be that since these students have been growing up with electronic technology, that maybe sometimes it's just nice to take a break and have a book in hand.
I think that a lot of people feel that way. That's probably the most frequent comment I hear when somebody tells me they prefer to read on a book. It's that sense of taking a break. And it makes me think that there are a lot of people that think they've made that decision who have never read on an Kindle, because I have the experience that I am taking a break from my computer, from my iPad, from my phone, that when I pick up that Oasis, it's more like a paper book. And it's sort of, I think that, the share of the reading that's done on devices on e-ink is shrinking. It's the phone is coming up, and so we're sort of missing a chance for people to go from that desire to have a break from screens to realizing there is something out there that's much more convenient in some settings than a book, and it feels like a break. But yeah,
one of the studies I'm interested in somebody doing some point, or if it's not ongoing right now, is what outcomes are there from listening to the book as you're reading it, as you can do with Audible.
Yeah.
And, I'm reading Thinking Fast and Slow right now in the print version. And
so are you doing the whisper sync
Audible,
where you're seeing it on the screen and hearing it at the same time?
I'm reading the paper version
I see.
of the book and listening to the Audible version.
As you're reading the paper version?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
I find it almost necessary with that book because whereas there are some things, some episodes of the podcast or Beatles music, some of those I can listen to while I'm mowing the lawn or doing the dishes, and it's not really, I'm not thrown off that much, but with a subject matter like Thinking Fast and Slow,
that's a pretty dense book.
I think it's being helpful that I'm able to have that voice reinforcing, and it forces me to slow down because the narrator's pace is slower than I would naturally read, but I think I'm probably missing points if I would just be reading it. So it's a fascinating idea. Just so many more things that, as humans, that we don't know yet. And
about how the mind works. And now that you're going to retire this month, and do you expect to be? Have you got a book that you're going to read just for pleasure sometime in the next month? Now that you're not going to be preparing for courses and doing your regular academic work.
I don't know if there's any specific book, but one of the things that I've not been part of a specific plan, but people worry about me getting bored somehow in retirement, and they haven't seen my to-do list at home of a quarter century of things that have been put on the back burner. But
for years,
I told people that I could be perfectly happy, sitting on my deck for the next 8 months, and I've got plenty of books at home in physical form and electronic, so I don't have any one in particular, but one of the reasons why I'm retiring is to try to, there's two sayings that have become part of my personal credo, and one of those is that nobody's promised tomorrow, and the other is that Father Time is undefeated. So, and I'm having to literally force myself. I think I'm going to have to start scheduling in leisure time because my tendency, even in this run-up to the official retirement, is to try to just get things done, and I don't think that's healthy either. So reading will be a large part of my
You can put that on your calendar.
Declining years.
Yeah. I'm reading in smaller time increments. One thing I love to fly, I read on a plane, and when I come out here to Omaha and I look out at that garden where Darlene and her sister are sitting right now, and this is a pretty peaceful part of the world for me.
This area in particular, where your sister-in-law lives at Ponca Hills, is my parents had a acreage not too far north of here, about 3 miles north of here. They were the first house under development, actually. That area is called Spring Valley. So, I mean, even some of the names are kind of evocative of what you're seeing physically.
Well, good. I knew we'd have an interesting conversation here in Omaha, so thank you for joining me. I have been speaking with Jim Jones, Associate Professor of Management in the College of Business Administration at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Thanks very much, Jim.
Thank you, Lynn. And I just would like to close briefly by tagging on to last week's episode by congratulating you on your decade of living your passion. And that's part of what my post-retirement years is going to be is in strengths coaching. And a large part of that is helping people find what they do best, and that actually brings them not just joy, but actually an energy. So your work in this podcast has been inspirational to me, as I've told you before, and following you into earlier retirement now.
Come on in, the water's fine.
Okie dokie.
I'd like to close with some more of your comments that came in after the anniversary show last week. This from Marie Sotiriou. Len, congrats on the 10-year anniversary of the Kindle Chronicles. It's an amazing milestone, and I just wanted to reach out and send my best wishes. I have been listening since the very first one and really do appreciate all of the effort that you have put into it through the years. When the first Kindle was released, you really were the only place to find information on the device, and now the podcast has successfully grown to include other important topics. I love the new author interview segments and look forward to the years ahead. Congrats again, Marie. Thanks very much, Marie. And Marie's one of you listeners who sends me lots of links that are timely, valuable, and my ability to stay on top of things really is improved by active readers like you. Shimon Schott wrote from Poland. Congrats, Len, on hosting the show for 10 years. This is a truly amazing achievement. I can't drop you a voicemail, so here are my written answers to your 3 questions. 1. How has the Kindle changed the way you read in the past 10 years? Shimon's answer: the Kindle has saved my marriage. With the amount of books I read, my wife would certainly throw me out of our apartment and then throw all the physical books after me for maximum impact. But seriously, I can read more and now have much better access to books. 2. What book has had the most impact on you in the past decade? Getting Things Done by David Allen, because it changed the way I work and organize my life. Other books that come to mind: The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday taught me about Stoicism. The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown was surprisingly emotional. The Confusion by Neil Stevenson was my favorite adventure. 3. What changes would you like to see in digital reading in the next 10 years? An end to geo-blocking and titles sold without digital rights management. I think he's for titles being sold without DRM, just like print books. Best, Shimon. Thanks very much. Also received a nice note from Al DeMitt that I'm going to save for next week. And this from David McQuaid. I've been eyeing the Oasis and waiting for it to go down in price. The 25% credit and gift card towards a new Kindle with a trade-in seems like a really good deal. I trade in my Kindle Paperwhite, the newest generation, 2015. How do you feel about your Oasis? Does it feel light, and does the bigger screen size improve the reading experience? How do the buttons feel after prolonged use? The form factor really intrigues me, and I think I'd love it. Thanks for your information and feedback. I look forward to the podcast every week. Also, I noticed the Fire HD 8 is no longer available through Amazon. Maybe there will be a new product rollout soon. I didn't know that. That's fascinating. David, I love the Oasis, and the more I use it, the more I like it. It is larger, which makes it not easy to carry around so much in some situations, but I mainly read it at night and take it to the beach, and I love the lightness of it, the quality of the screen, and the buttons feel rock solid. They really feel like the way the buttons should have been on the previous high-end device. I think that was the Voyage, the one that's being discontinued. That's it for this week. I'm not sure who my guest will be next week. I've got an invite out, but I haven't heard back yet as the time of recording this. And I still plan to set up a sweepstakes for subscribers to my Kindle Chronicles free email newsletter, but I didn't have time to put it together this week. I do know that if you're subscribed to the newsletter, you're going to be eligible to win the free brand new Paperwhite that I bought on Prime Day for the purpose. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Ocean Park, Maine. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.